Welcome everyone. Thank you for joining this Mishcon Academy session. It's part of a series of online events, videos and podcasts taking a look at the bigger issues faced in society today. Just to introduce myself, I'm Jeff Dragon. I'm one of the partners in the emerging companies team here at Mishcon. I'm hosting today's event. So I am joined today by Simon Court. Simon's worked as a leadership coach and guide to business founders, leaders and leadership teams for more than 25 years and has a huge breadth and depth of experience across sectors, cultures and types of company, working from kind of startups right through to exits and sustainable businesses. He's also the author of Founder's Legacy, 50 game-changing leadership lessons for great businesses. Simon, welcome. Tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of your experience today.
So I guess there are three parts to my life, and you've covered a couple of them. One is I'm now an author since last year. I published Founder's Legacy. Secondly, I've founded my own company 27 years ago, Value Partnership. It's a leadership consultancy. I founded it with my wife, and it's still doing amazing work around the world today, and I'm chairman of that. And I guess the third part is me as a leadership coach and a leadership team coach. And as you said, I've been doing that for the best part of 30 years now. So along the way, I've worked with businesses of kind of all scales, really, from the huge to the small, very small. And the last 10 years, I guess I've been really focused on working with founder CEOs to help them to grow their companies. And I helped to create 2 unicorns in the last 10 years, ManyClip and Typico. So all of that experience I've tried to somehow condense into the book.
Perfect. And on the kind of your style of leadership coaching, and you mention it in the book,
Yeah.
you talk about how typical coaches like to kind of ask a lot of questions and then let their clients kind of find the answers. That's not quite your style. Am I right in that?
Yeah, I think that's partially true. I mean, there's a lot of coaches out there who are following a process, and they don't ever leave that process because they're so committed to it. I nearly said wedded to it, but let's just agree they're committed to it. Given I've got all that experience, it seems a shame to me to keep it all locked up and not to share it or use it. So I do share my experience sparingly, but I do share it because I think it's valuable. And I try and do it in a way that it's at the right time, in a way that's useful to the client. Because with all those variety of businesses that I referred to, you know, they all need to hear different things at different times. So that's part of my judgment, I guess.
And I don't want to start off this kind of conversation on a gloomy note, but I think it's important to address it. And
Yeah.
you mention it in your book, and we kind of mention it a lot to our clients, and we use it in the marketing for this event. But we quote you as saying kind of 9 out of 10 startups will fail.
Mm-hmm.
With your experience and your kind of expertise in this area, why do you think that is, and what can we do to kind of change and help that narrative?
Yeah, it's carnage, isn't it? Really. So I think creative destruction is part of capitalism, and as long as we're running a capitalist economy, we have to accept there's a certain amount of failure. However, dig into the data a little bit. The 90% number is based on the explanation of why it's 90% is founder reported reasons. Yeah. So when you look into those reasons, they're typically things like run out of cash, didn't find product market fit, got out competed, the founding team sort of fell out. There's a host of things. Yeah. There's about 24 things I think that come up. The thing you notice if you look behind the data is that what they all have in common is a founder who didn't find the answer to some of the big questions facing their business. They didn't know enough about how to raise money. They didn't surround themselves with the right people. But there's a host of things, and what they all come back to is the capability of the founder and their ability to lead their nascent business. So my conviction about this is that if a founder can learn to lead, they can mitigate a lot of those risks. They can't prevent all of them, but a lot of the ones that I describe are highly preventable. And I think it's quite important to help founders to recognize what learning to lead really means. And my intention here is to write a book that gives founders the learning they need to reduce the risk of failure, but also turn that on its head, enhance their chances of success considerably. So back to a more positive mindset about this. But there is one thing that you may have picked up, because I know you've read the book. There's a chapter in there about what I call I'm not the first person to call it this, but the founder's trap.
Yes, yeah.
And for those who aren't familiar with it or haven't read my book, the founder's trap is the idea that despite their best intentions and their commitment, their grit and their hard work, founders sometimes are their own worst enemies. And the time you notice this most, I think, is when the business has got to a certain size and a certain level, and the next stage requires it to scale. And that scaling requires a set of skills and capabilities that many founders have never learned. And why would they, really? They didn't set up a business to become a leader. They set up a business to solve a real world problem or to do something amazing. So I try to fill that gap through my coaching and in a way through my writing.
And you mentioned obviously Founder's Legacy is the book. You mentioned kind of wanting to help and kind of give them the tools that founders need. So predominantly the book's aimed at founders. What's kind of the core purpose for writing it? Was that you kind of identifying a gap in the marketplace, or were there people that you'd coach saying, "Hey, Simon, you should actually get some of this stuff down"? And
people have been saying that to me for years, but I mean, writing a book requires committing probably 2 years of your life, really. Wow. And I'm not sure I could have afforded to do it, or I knew enough when I was younger. I wish I had known what I know now when I was 30 or something, but such is life, right? Yeah. And so the book is aimed squarely at founders who want to learn how to lead, and it's also aimed at leaders who want to lead with a founder's mindset, because I believe that a lot of corporate managers and corporate leaders would really benefit from learning from that founder mentality. And so given that, I think my hope for the book is that it really does unlock new learning for leaders, for founders. They learn to lead, and as a consequence, just think about the potential economic and social value of reducing that failure rate from 90% to, say, 85%. It doesn't sound like much. You scale that up, though, it's potentially enormous. And that is my hope, I guess, for the book.
Perfect. And you've kind of split it out into chapters. The subtitle is 50 Game-Changing Lessons for Building a Great Business. Why did you structure it that way? And also, if someone's reading the book and founders or leaders, how should they read it to get the most out of it? Because we spoke about the founder's trap just now, and as I said before, kind of if you flick to the kind of contents page, there's certain chapters like founder's trap that kind of grab your attention straight away.
No, that's all very intentional, I can assure you. So look, the book is in 3 sort of chunks. The first part is, what does it take to lead? So it talks about things like courage. It talks about risk. It talks about the growth mindset you need to be a great leader. The second part looks at the job of a leader. So we're looking at things like, how do you build strategy? How do you create a culture that is distinctive and really drives performance? And the third part deals with all the sort of tactical challenges that every founder will be familiar with, such as hiring or managing performance issues, or and some very basic things like listening, which are remarkably important. if you really want to learn and grow. So that's how I sort of structured the book. The 50 chapters idea was simply that founders are unbelievably busy people. So 50 10-minute chapters is a lot more digestible than 10 30-minute ones or whatever it is. So it was intentionally made to be a kind of companion. It's not a novel. It is a sort of a book with information and knowledge in it. And it's designed to replicate, in a way, what it would be like to be coached by me, I guess. Yeah. Scary thought, I know. But I mean, it's a lot cheaper than being coached by me. And it is, so what you'll find in each chapter is some information about the issues involved in that. You'll get a bit of theory. You'll get some stories to bring it to life. And then at the end of each chapter, there are some questions. They're the kind of questions that I use in coaching. And my hope is that people really reflect on those questions. And even further, they act on those questions. Because the only way you learn how to lead is through practice. So what I want the book to do is stimulate people to think differently and then act differently. That's how you get better.
Perfect. And we've spoken a bit in kind of who the book's for, but there seems to be quite clear in your mind definitions or distinctions between these are founders, these are leaders, and you know you can be both, but they're kind of separate concepts. So can you define what you mean by a founder versus what you mean kind of by a leader, and how you distinguish between those two?
Yes, they are definitely not the same thing, and sometimes they're confused. Yeah. So the founder is the biological parent or parents of the business, right? They bring it into the world through their own sort of hard work and imagination and creativity. And they have a very great attachment to it, which shows up in both positive and negative ways. But they passionately care about its long-term future, its mission, and what it's trying to achieve in the world. Leaders are the people who take responsibility for the current performance and future of a business. And they have a different mindset, and they take decisions that not only affect things like its mission and its product, but they care about every aspect of the business, and they take responsibility for every aspect of the business. So ownership and leadership are not the same thing. We know that in big companies. It's obvious to us. The shareholders and the management are distinct. But sometimes they get a bit confused in growing companies. And I think it's really important that founders don't just think of themselves as founders, that when they step into the CEO job, they actually learn the job, which is why there's a chapter in the book called The Job of a CEO. Because I don't think you learn that as a founder. Where would you learn that? You kind of learn it on the job, right?
Yeah, and you spend so much of your time, you know, dealing with issues as they crop up, trying to raise funds, which takes, you know, can take months out of your time. You don't actually have time to scale up yourself necessarily as you go along the way, which is crucial.
But I quote Ben Horowitz, who's a well-known entrepreneur and venture capitalist, in the book, and he said the thing that seems to surprise investors, and it shouldn't, is that founders don't know how to do the CEO job. They really don't. And so we need to help them to learn. Otherwise, their business will fail. Yep. And so finding the right founder, the right co-founder as well, this is sort of brings us into things like team dynamics. That I think that's quite important as well, because a lot of businesses are not a solo founder, right? There is a co-founder or two co-founders even.
And so, you know, taking it back to kind of companies that are starting up with that kind of founder-led businesses, and we talked about the distinction, you know, they're not kind of necessarily ready for the CEO role. What can that mean for kind of founder-led businesses in terms of, you know, what strengths do those founders bring? Because they bring a lot of strengths to the role.
Yeah, they do.
But also what kind of weaknesses, what are those kind of gaps?
It's almost as if you take every one of these strengths that I'm now going to talk about, and if you turn it over, you're going to see the the weakness that is visible in it. So, you know, start with this amazing sense of purpose. Yep. founders are generally more purpose-driven, I think, than a lot of corporate leaders. You get appointed into a senior leadership job and you start talking about purposes, it's like a mission statement on a wall, but for founders, it's in here. And of course, when you lift that up, what you find is that after a while, they're so deeply attached to that, and they can become so wedded to that they can lose sight of all the other things that matter when you're trying to build and grow a company. They have immense energy and and drive, and you can see it in some of the well-known founders that we see in public life. And of course, that sometimes means that they just don't know when to slow down, when to reflect, when to start listening to other people. Their egos can run amok even. What else? They are risk takers, right? They love, they don't view risk in the same way as most mortals do. But of course, sometimes that means that they take excessive risk and they are a bit blind to the consequences of that risk. So there are lots of ways in which founders bring this incredible energy, this creativity, this obsessive drive, and this kind of impressive force of nature. It's like an elemental force, really, into the world. And at the same time, they can stop listening to other people. They won't or don't build a team. They try to do far too much themselves. They have a sense of themselves that is a bit disproportionate to the success of their enterprise because they can't do everything. They simply can't. And it's really important that they grow into somebody who recognizes that I'm trying to build a culture in which lots of people can contribute to this mission, as opposed to me and my close mates, if you like.
Yeah, and it's something that we see quite a lot with some of the clients that we act for when there's, especially in those larger teams that you mentioned where everyone's kind of trying to have a role, but actually acting as a group is important as well.
Yeah. I mean, if you ask investors to describe a management team, and I know we'll get into the sort of topic of teams a bit later, I think, but investors tend to view a team as the sort of sum total of all the different competencies that are represented in it. Well, the way I view a team is that it is about not just that, but it's also realizing the synergies between those people and getting it really functioning as a high-performing team. And that gives you next level performance. So it's not just the names and the job titles and a chart that they stick at the back of a deck to try and win some investment. It is actually about building a real team of people who can outperform. Yeah.
So I appreciate we've spoken a lot about the founders and the challenges of going to CEO. We've probably made it sound slightly daunting to some, but it can be done. Some people have natural leadership qualities, but it can be kind of learn and you can scale up, and that's the process that you go through. You mentioned you've kind of worked with a couple of unicorn companies, and actually a lot of the clients that you work for are founders becoming leaders. Can you give us an example of a CEO that you've worked with, if possible, where that transition has happened and you've seen that kind of flourish and be a success?
Yeah, for sure. I think I'll talk a bit about Rob Small, who he's one of the heroes of the book. So Rob founded Miniclip, the gaming company, in his bedroom in the 90s, and he did a fantastic job with miniclip.com in building it into a website which had a lot of traffic, and what little revenue he did have came through advertising, but it wasn't monetizing particularly well. And by the time you got to 2012, when I met him, the business was flatlined and it was in a lot of trouble, and Rob was unsure what to do. And one of the reasons it was in difficulties was good old Steve Jobs had introduced the iPhone 3G, and every gaming company was building mobile games, and Miniclip was on the web. So there was a big decision facing Rob, and he wasn't equipped to do the CEO job. He didn't have a team that was good enough to make the pivot to mobile. he didn't have a strategy at the time to move to mobile, and he was in a lot of trouble.
Yeah.
And when he and I first met, we started sort of exploring all of this, and we talked about his options, because one of the options facing a founder is to sort of stand back and hire somebody to come in and do that job, right, the CEO job. Yeah. And but Rob didn't have enough money to do that. So we had to make a decision, and it was pretty obvious what it was, that Rob had to grow into the CEO the business needed. Rob had the kind of mentality to roll his sleeves up and say, okay, what do I need to learn here? And we started by transforming his team. One role, one person at a team. We started to make progress, built a strategy, and MiniClip was sold less than 3 years later for well in excess of €1 billion, euros, dollars, pounds, whatever you like. And it was bought by Tencent of China. Rob realized his dream for the business. Today, MiniClip is probably revenue of $1 billion, not a valuation of $1 billion. It is a phenomenal success story. And I think it largely resulted from Rob truly embracing the CEO role and having that growth mindset you need to make that change. And if I just, to finish on that, I think there were like 3 things that, and by the way, this is for every coaching assignment I've ever done. I look for these 3 things in somebody to have a sense of whether they can make that growth journey or not. One is, do they see themselves accurately? Have they got realistic self-insight? And Rob was under no illusions about where he was and what he knew and what he didn't know. He had that lovely honesty about, this is who I am. Can I do this? Second thing is he motivated to make this transition? And it was about rescuing his company, which deserved to be rescued, really. And then the third part is, do I know what to do differently? Do I understand what are those new behaviors that I need to practice? And I just say to him, I can help you with that. We can work that out together.
Yeah.
And so we started that journey together, and it was a phenomenal relationship. I don't know if you can imagine this, but the thing about coaching is it's all done in private behind closed doors, which is why writing a book was quite difficult for me, really, because I think I'm sharing all of this stuff, and I had to be very careful what I could say about whom, because a lot of it's confidential. So I tend to talk publicly about success stories, and obviously for people who went through a tough time, I have disguised the names and so on. So yeah.
Amazing. And Rob, I mean, I'm massively grateful for Rob for most IT lessons in high school, and then I'm still playing MiniClip games now, so I'm glad it pivoted. He sounds as he is someone that doesn't sound like a great CEO who became an exceptional CEO in quite a short space of time. Yeah. I know you've touched on his humility, and I've heard him speak, and that comes across in terms of how he approached that. But are there other lessons more generally that founders can learn from someone like Rob in terms of how to approach that transition?
That's a really great question. Before I answer it, I just wanted to say to you, I was with him and his family and my wife and I in Estonia, and we're getting a ferry across to an island where nobody lives. And the ferryman, when he discovered that this was Rob Small, the founder of MiniClip, he just started talking about all the games he played when he was a kid. I mean, even in rural Estonia. So what are the lessons about Rob, and how applicable are they beyond that? So Rob, he is a great leader, but he's not a unicorn, if you like, himself. He just did the work. And the things that we worked on together, I think there are probably 4 themes. One is, which I've already touched on, which is his learning to be a great CEO. So learning what are the things that maybe I haven't wanted to focus on in the past, but I need to put a lot more time and energy into now. And he was prepared to do that work. And he had me to help him with that. The second thing is he built a fantastic team. And every founder either knows this or finds out the hard way that this is true. If you can build a great team, your business has potentially got liftoff already. And so we worked out how to build a great team. And for him, that meant facing some very difficult personal challenges because one of the things that founders do, as you probably have experienced, is they tend to surround themselves with people they know and trust, sometimes even family and friends. And they are not always the best people. The difference in a leadership mentality is I'm going to surround myself with the very best people who will know what to do when faced with a difficult contract in the United States or a advertising decision or whatever. And so we together worked to transform his team into a great team. The third bit is about strategy. It was a bit of prevarication because the website was something he was deeply attached to. It was sort of his baby. And that attachment thing that we talked about earlier that founders have was probably getting in the way of the necessary change the business needed to go through. So we went all in on mobile.
Yeah.
You have got to have a strategy that solves the decisive challenge facing your business. Otherwise, you won't be successful. You have very limited resources as a founder, right? So you've got to make your bet and go all in on it. Otherwise, you've got no chance. And then the last thing is, it makes it sound like it was all pretty straightforward, but it was one problem after another. I feel like it's the casualty department of a hospital sometimes. You need a triage nurse at the front just telling you whether you can save this patient or not. So I think his resilience and his grit stems from his purpose and his belief that he will find a way to do this. I think it's probably one of the things that all founders need in spades is this incredible grit and resilience, because it's super hard building a successful business.
It is, and you never know what's going to kind of come up next. That's going to, like you said, it's like a casualty room. And again, yeah, you made it sound like it was, let's deal with this, let's deal with this, let's deal with this, and obviously that's when we speak about it, that's how we talk about it. But all those things are happening at one time, right? And it's
at breakneck speed.
Yeah, at breakneck speed, exactly. It's difficult.
It
You've kind of mentioned it previously when we were speaking about the book and the book being in 3 parts. There's a kind of a theme running through the whole of the book, I guess, but especially in the first part of it, that's around personal growth of the founder and that kind of shifting from kind of founder to CEO and how you deal with that. Recognizing strengths and weaknesses, having some humility, identifying kind of the founder's patterns, what needs to change, how you deal with failure, of which there is, we talk about 9 out of 10 startups fail, but even the successful ones have a number of failures along the way, which they have to get over. Why do you put such an emphasis, I guess, on the first part on personal growth and those types of items?
Yeah. So I guess when you think about Rob's story, you can see how important a growth mindset was. And growth mindset is the chapter 1 in the book. It's not an accident, obviously. Look, I mean, you're faced with so many things that could disrupt you as a founder. The things like interest rates or what Donald Trump decides to do today, they're not within your control. So when you find something that is within your control, it's well worth investing in it. And your own mindset, your own growth, your own skills, these are things entirely within your control. So my starting point for people is to say, look, I've got some good news for you. You can do this. It's a combination of motivation, self-insight, and being ready to try and practice new skills and new ways of acting. And so that is why that is sort of a central plank and theme of the book, I guess. And then we come to sort of self-insight. So if you know your strengths, you can focus your energy and you will target things which really play to your strengths. If you know your weaknesses, you can recruit people and surround yourself with people who can compensate for your weaknesses. If you don't have self-insight, you can do neither. You're kind of blind. So that's why I believe self-insight is an absolutely crucial component of leadership, and really understanding yourself and how to get the best out of yourself and then the best out of the people around you. Don't make that classic founder mistake of surrounding yourself with people who tend to agree with you and look up to you. Surround yourself with people who are different from you and who can provide you with some perspective. What were some of the other things you mentioned? I'm getting old. I can't remember.
No, that's fine. Identifying your patterns was one, and that I found that quite an interesting concept. Firstly, for kind of what do you mean actually by patterns, and then how do you
sort of
how identifying them can help.
No, I think that's what we were just talking to with your strengths and weaknesses and understanding your patterns of behavior. So, for example, I had a guy who was coaching who was a fantastic problem solver. And unfortunately, he solved everybody else's problems for them as well as his own. And they felt disempowered by him. So through coaching, I got him not to let go of his strength as a great creative problem solver, but to become a creative problem solving coach. So he helped other people to solve their own problems by helping them to see the questions to ask and help them to solve those problems in a more effective way. So they're a bit wiser and less dependent on him rather than ever more dependent on him. But I think one of the others was humility, right?
Yeah.
And we don't live in an age when humble leaders are all around. It feels like we're living in the opposite era. And yet, I think the truth is that humility is probably one of the smartest places to land if you're interested in great leadership. It's like a filter. It converts knowledge and sort of evidence into wisdom and insight. It stops you from having a kind of distorted view of the world. It enables you to see things accurately and to listen to other people. And as a founder, you really do need to listen to the people around you and take on board their perspectives and actually ask yourself, am I right about this? Because lots of the time we're wrong, right? Yeah. And it sort of plays into the other thing you mentioned about failing and being comfortable with failure. I mean, you're going to fail loads of times as a founder. I mean, failing fast is now fashionable in founder circles for good reasons, right? We want to find the cheapest possible way and the quickest possible way of figuring out what really works. And that's for all startups now, not just for tech firms. It's just a smart way of operating. So you really have to put your ego to one side and try things and view failure not as failure, but as learning, as an opportunity to pivot and grow. And given all the uncertainty surrounding us, that's kind of the only way that makes any sense for us, really. It's how you navigate this world, I think.
And I think they all, as you said, they all kind of combine, don't they? Because you need the humility after failure as well to just say, okay, we tried that didn't work, let's move on.
What have we learned?
Yeah, what have we learned? Rather than, well, that failed, but I think I can still get it to work if I do X, Y, and Z and spend a lot more time on it. But
it also is the route to success, I think, because, I heard Roger Federer talking about this. He's got the stats on his win rate. He's only won just over, I think it was 54% of every points he's ever played. He's only won 54% of them. But when it comes to the really big points,
that's when he wins. Or when he won.
So we should just really relax about failing and learning from failure. And it's a lot strategy nowadays. It's more sailboat than speedboat. We have to keep tacking. So every time we learn that this isn't working, we tack. And I think that's true for us as individuals and as leaders, and it's true for our businesses too.
Right. And kind of, I guess on that theme of humbleness, and we've talked about kind of the importance of teams as well. I know you quote Steve Jobs in your book when you say great things in businesses are never done by one person, they're done by a team of people, which is in the earlier Steve Jobs days, probably a slightly ironic quote from him. But
that's fair, actually. Yeah.
The kind of the third part of your book, the final part, has quite a strong focus on, well, this is how we build and this is how we manage a team.
Yeah.
kind of what's your advice for founders in those areas? Because we spoke at, you mentioned Rob and his difficulties in,
Yeah.
because I know that hearing him speak, he said he struggled emotionally with having to say goodbye to some of his earlier team members. We spoke about how most of our founder teams are not just one person, it's 2, 3, or 4. How do you advise kind of founders, and what are your thoughts on kind of actually team building?
So there's a whole science and art to building a great team, and the first thing I think is to recognize just how important it is. I mean, if you look at sport, you can see the mentality they have about teaming. It's not always successful, but think about the effort and care that goes into selecting players in any team sport on the basis of their skill level, their mentality, their sort of flexibility and positional sense, their level of conditioning. And then you think about the work that goes into preparing them for key moments against key competitors under pressure, and helping them to learn how to cope under pressure. And what do we do in business? We kind of recruit people. We view them as somehow distinct positions, and we get them in a room and we call them a team. But do we do the work? No, in my experience. And I've been called in to help so many teams over the years, because I'm a team as well as an individual coach. And what I see is teams frequently where trust is low, where discussions are a bit fragmented, where they don't reach decisions, they don't reach good conclusions. And founder teams are possibly slightly better than a lot of corporate teams, but they're still not good.
Yeah.
And they're often dominated by the founder, and everyone's looking at him or her to sort of take their cue. So there's a bit of learning to do here, and there's a chapter in the book. It's one of the most frequently cited chapters, chapter 38. I haven't memorized all 50, but it's chapter 38. And in that chapter, I set out what are the disciplines that you need to build a great team, and what are the dynamics that you're looking for. And that there's a bit of magic in that, because if you put those disciplines and dynamics in place, you will be amazed at the uplift in the performance of your team. And I've seen it many times. But I think there's another side to your question about, because there's more than just building the team. It was about managing and getting the best out of people. And let me just think about that for a second. I think one thing I would say is too many founders try to be an octopus. They have their sort of hands everywhere and try to shape far too much. And they believe that, if you want it done properly, you do it yourself. There's a little bit of that going on, right? And the more octopus-like you are, the more frustrated the people around you are probably going to be, and the less they're going to grow, and you're not going to get the best out of them. And if you expensively hire really good people to do the job, you're undermining them in a way if you're not careful. Yeah. So I really think founders should think about, they need to learn to stand back a bit, learn to empower or delegate, and recognize that individually they are not scalable. What makes them scalable is if they build a culture that reflects their values and the way they work. So culture building is another big theme of that sort of the second part of the book. Other than that, I think hiring is another sort of big topic. Founders are always in a hurry to hire people, and they don't always have a great process, don't always do enough care, take enough care over it. So I think invest in a really good hiring process, because every time you recruit somebody, you are shifting the culture of your firm, especially if it's still quite small. Yeah. And every time you make a mistake, it's costing you a lot of time and money. Yeah. So getting the hiring process right and efficient, and also really understanding what I call in the book the pivot, the critical combination of capabilities that will make the difference between high performance and low performance in a given role. So getting that right is another theme. And the last thing I'd probably pick on is, if you want to manage performance and get the best out of your team, learn to coach. Learn to have the right kinds of conversations with them over the course of a year. And I sort of like Marcus Buckingham's idea of a year as 52 short sprints. So you view every week as an opportunity to reflect on what I learned last week, what went well, what didn't, what have I learned, and what am I going to do next week that is really going to be transformative and really move things forward. Because if you have that kind of dialogue and relationship with the people who work for you, the pace and energy it brings is phenomenal. So anyway.
Amazing. And I think there's some really valuable lessons, particularly around kind of recruitment and how that's done. I know you draw parallels to sport a lot in your book and kind of the lessons we can learn, but especially around, if you think about the Premier League as it is, so much like data-driven analytics before you hire a player or sign a player, the kind of Moneyball aspect to baseball. And I think you're right. We don't typically, when hiring, kind of apply those same mindsets. We just think we need someone to fill this position, and we'll do a short process and get someone that we feel is right. But
I mean, I can tell you a story from very briefly from an insure tech firm in Austria. What happens is if you're an Austrian company and you build a successful business model that works in Austria, you go into Germany. You need a head of sales for Germany, and they hired somebody, and they discovered over the course of, so they took probably 3 months to hire him. They let him go into Germany. 6 months in, there were absolutely no results coming back. Over the next 6 months, they tried to manage it. He was asked to leave after 12 months with no results, and then another 3 months to hire, and then 3 months to get up to. So they lost 2 years.
Wow.
And it killed the company.
Yeah.
And when you look at what they hired, nice fella, but he had the mentality and the energy of a strategist and a relationship builder. He didn't have the mindset and energy of somebody who's going to win business, convert it, and communicate really well with the team in Austria about the progress he's making and how to accelerate things. So get your hiring right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm going to have one final question for you,
Yeah.
and then we'll open it up to floor and
Good.
and online questions. We've spoken a lot about founders kind of to build a great business, to build a sustainable business, the need to kind of change their approach slightly and become leaders, become CEOs. Is there a risk that if we are asking them to make that change, that they start to feel like they are selling their soul a bit or losing what, the drive that made them want to be a founder in the first place?
Yeah. I'm laughing because I'm just imagining if Rob Small was sitting here, he would be laughing because he would say, well, I didn't sell my soul. I sold my company, though, for a lot of money. I think, no, I don't think, that's true. I think what they learn when they grapple with this is they just become, they have more agency, they have more impact. If you read the book, you'll know that I don't ever for 1 second think they should let go of what makes them unique and special and their sense of purpose. So I celebrate that, and I think you can combine that and with learning to lead. And I think leadership is their best friend, and they need to get closer to it.
Perfect. Thank you. We'll open up to questions, any from the floor or online, Jan.
Hi.
Does that work? Thank you. I found that really interesting, and I'm looking forward to reading the book. One of the things that you talk about is the characteristics of founders. We talked about quite a bit. When they come to you for coaching, I guess one of the similar characteristics they have is that they're open to be coached. Do you have any examples of where you've managed to persuade somebody who kind of had quite a negative attitude towards coaching to be coached with successful results?
Yeah, it's a great question. I suppose the first thing I should say, if I'm being honest, is the ones who come to me tend to be the ones who are open to being coached. So it kind of screens out a lot of the more intransigent ones. But I have people who have they seem to flirt with me. Like there's one founder, I won't mention his name for obvious reasons. Every sort of couple of years, he sends me a message and he goes, "Hey, Simon, how's it going? I'm thinking maybe we should meet up for a cup of coffee." And I get the impression that he's skirting around this idea of coaching. But And I think some of the people that I do coach in the early stages, they make the right noises about being open, but actually when you start the conversation, you realize that they quickly shut down things that feel uncomfortable. And it is actually learning to be more comfortable with discomfort that enables you to grow as a person, right? We know that from any part of our life, that you need to find some courage if you're going to step out of your comfort zone and try something new. So I usually find that after maybe 2, 3, 4 sessions, that some of those barriers drop and it starts to feel real. And I know that we're going to be able to do good work together when they say, look, I don't know what to do. The moment you're that vulnerable, I feel like, well, this is good. I mean, they don't feel good in that moment, but I feel really good because I know I can help at that point.
Hi, Simon. Thank
Hello.
you. I was wondering how you would describe the writing process and what would you suggest to anyone that was going to write a business book?
I don't do it. I don't do it if you want to become rich or anything. Do it because you have something you need to share with the world. It's about having a really strong sense of purpose behind it. That's what drove me to get up in the morning and do the work. And then I think you have to treat it like a job when you're in the writing process. Lots of authors, I think, I learned this long before I did, and I just took that advice. And so, Monday morning it's chapter 12. I'll do my research in the morning. I'll write in the afternoon, and I'll put it to the test with my wife in the evening, and she'll either send me back to the drawing board or enable me to do some minor editing and move on. And I have a professional editor as well, but honestly, there's only one person for most of us, I guess, whether it's a spouse or a close friend, who really knows your voice and whether or not when you've written something and you read it out loud, whether it sounds like you. And so my wife deserves more than a little credit for the content of this book. She helped me to capture it. Because it's quite hard when you get to my age and you're trying to remember so many stories and try to condense all that knowledge into this sort of passion project, really.
Thank you. A question from online here. If you could give one piece of advice to a corporate leader looking to have more of a founder's mindset, what would you say?
Goodness, it's not hard to think of things. I'm just trying to choose the one thing. I mean, every time you try and change something in a large corporation, it feels like you need to get an army of people on board, and you need to write a business case, and a business case on a scale that is entirely disproportionate to the thing that you need to try. I would say just unleash a lot of easy change by reducing the barriers to being much more experimental. It is that experimental kind of approach and mindset that I think makes founders learn faster, move faster, and their businesses move faster. As soon as you put in place too much process, too much bureaucracy, you kill a lot of innovation and change. So I'd probably say that. Make it much easier to try and test new things. And by the way, it just triggered a story in my mind. I did a lot of work with Canon quite a long time ago, and all of their products were designed and created in Japan. And here in Europe or in EMEA, it was just sell them, find customers for them. They weren't designed around customers here. They were designed around a Japanese kind of approach, Japanese mentality. And they realized they needed more innovation to be able to use their products in a consumer market. So they started acquiring small startups in Shoreditch and places like that. And the first thing they would do, they would tell them to use their HR, finance, IT, and all of their processes. And they were killing the very startup cultures they were buying. It's a huge mistake. So you need to really try to find a way of relaxing some of those constraints to encourage a lot more innovation.
And another question online, but one I wish I'd asked myself really. When thinking about building a team, how do you feel about psychometric testing or personality tests to ensure you get the right fit?
Oh, good question. I do actually say a little bit about that in the book. I think they're a very useful part of a process. In the book, I talk about the most powerful tools. And the most powerful tool of all is to use a variety of tools in combination to triangulate what we know about somebody. The one thing I would say specifically about psychometrics is that people view the product of them as objective truths. They are not. And secondly, psychometrics are designed to measure personality, and personality does not predict performance. So be very cautious about how you interpret that data. I am a bigger fan of things like a tool I mentioned in here called the GC Index, which is basically evaluates what kind of energy for impact you have, and it's a much more behavioral tool. And if they, for example, my example from the Austrian insurtech business, if they had done a GC Index on him, they would have discovered that he was a strategist, and what they really need was an implementer. And they probably would have avoided that very, very expensive hiring mistake. I hope that answers the question.
To what extent do you think received wisdom on the founder's journey is predicated on male founders and their approaches? Are there adaptations that need to happen to support more women in designing and building their businesses?
What an interesting question. So I was talking to a female founder literally just before this conversation, and she was describing some of the challenges she faced in dealing with a male investment community and the quite male-dominated culture that sort of persists, particularly around tech startups and that sort of whole world. So, I mean, Silicon Valley is just a monster, really, and the venture capital environment around Silicon Valley is just is very male dominated. It's white, it's male, it's got a set of values that it's now projecting even into government. So I'm going to be slightly wary of how far I go with this line of argument. But so I think that is something that every founder has to reckon with and try and find their own solution for. There are now communities of female founders, communities of female investors who are trying to find ways of actively supporting female founders. When I wrote this book, I was thinking very carefully about how to frame it so that it doesn't come across, because it isn't, as about male founders and how male founders succeed or fail. It's not about that. It's about, when I talk about humility, for example, you're far more likely to find humility in female founders than in male founders. When I talk about emotional intelligence, regrettably, as a man, you're far more likely to find emotional intelligence in female founders. You see this time and time again. Male founders are more likely to take big risks and blow things up if they get those risks wrong. So there are some real differences. And by the way, the data shows that female-led founder businesses outperform male ones. So investors are missing out if they don't invest. It's foolish. And if they're driven by the numbers, they should be investing.
This is a question from Gail Leonard online. You talk in your book about managing energy. What activities are founders prone to that you think should be the first that should be pruned?
So, hello, Gail. I know Gail. God bless her. I really like Gail. Sorry, this is all going out live, isn't it? So Gail, I don't know if I fully understand the question, Gail, but I think there's a whole chapter in the book about you can't, managing your time is a bit of a kind of dead conversation for me, because you're completely limited in terms of your time. But energy levels can be lifted and sustained. And when I coach people and they come online, because often it's on a screen now, you can see from their face almost immediately whether they're burned out and exhausted and feeling a bit defeated, or whether they're actually in a quite healthy place where you can perform at your best. So it almost takes me back to the previous question about the culture around startups. Is you should be, working 24/7 and forget balanced life, forget the fact that you might have some children at home, or you have a need to look after your physical health. I strongly encourage founders to look after themselves as humans. There's a stat that says something like 70% of founders in the sort of Bay Area have got a self-reported mental health problems. You can't build a successful business if you're not well and if you're not taking care of yourself. So, you should think about this quite carefully. I'm not saying don't work hard. I'm not saying don't work for short periods. You might have to work the weekend and pull out all the stops to get the product out the door. Of course, that's true. But don't transform that into a way of life, the way you should behave every week in, week out. It doesn't work. It will grind you.
I'm just going to try and fit in one more question before we close. How important do you think purpose and story is in creating a successful business today?
Well, the short answers vary. The storytelling part, I just did some work with a colleague of mine with Sega, an amazing gaming company. This is Sega, this is gaming. And we work really hard with them on how they tell the story of their iconic products and what they're trying to do now in operating much more globally. And that is how leaders, in some ways, project their vision and their energy to a much wider group. And the whole process of storytelling is something I do explore in the book. You can take a leaf out of some of the greatest storytellers out there. And, individually, that sort of would be someone like Steve Jobs. And I think what you've got to do is you've got to think about, how do you want your audience to think? How do you want your audience to feel? And how do you want them to act as a consequence of the story that you tell? And if you think about it on all three levels, rather than how do I want them to think, you'll have much more compelling impact, and you're far more likely to affect the way they behave coming out of the room.